Insurance and Risk Mitigation with Brennan Pothetes of Butter Insurance. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFiorio. I'm your host for the show. Super happy to have you along. Welcome to the show, especially to those of you who are new. So much content for you over on keystotheshop.com, where you can find all of our main past episodes. Do me a favor and subscribe to the show. Do yourself a favor, because you'll always be updated with new episodes. You can peruse all of our main content and shift break content. There's quite a bit, 10 episodes per month on average for Keys to the Shop. So that's a lot of value that I want you to get from the show. So go ahead and subscribe, and don't forget to share these episodes and the show with your team, with your friends on social media. That would be amazing as well. Now, Keys to the Shop is much more than a podcast. It's also a consulting and coaching company for coffee shop owners, managers, and operators of cafes who want to start their business off on the right foot, lay a really great foundation for a thriving, sustainable business, or people who already have a coffee shop who want to refine their operations, quality, and leadership and management of that cafe so they can find solutions and clarity and joy in the process of running a great coffee shop. So whether that involves on-site or remote coaching and consultation, there's a lot that we can do together, and I would love to talk with you about it. All you need to do is email chris@keystotheshop.com to set up a free strategy call with me, and we'll talk all about what's going on with your business and figure out how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. If that sounds interesting to you, I would love the opportunity to get to serve you. Go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. One of the great things about running a coffee bar is when everything comes together to produce a singular experience. And of course, when it comes to the coffee, that means everything has to be dialed in to the utmost. And when we're relying on equipment, there's no better equipment out there for getting great batch brew coffee than the ground control Cyclops brewer from Voga Coffee. This is a game changer in terms of coffee quality and what you can expect from batch brew coffee. It is the next level. The SCA award-winning technology gives you the ability to extract an incredible range of flavors from your coffee and do so consistently. And it's not only a batch brewer, but it also makes tea, batch diced lattes, batch cold brew. People around the world are using this machine for its exceptional extraction potential. So check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee for more information. If you're looking to upgrade your quality, really distinguish yourself from the competition, and also create better workflow and profitability, then I think you should be considering getting a ground control Cyclops brewer for your store. Again, for more information, go check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. Now, I'm definitely one of those people that takes in all of the different sensory aspects of an experience. That's the sight, that's the sounds, that's the smells, the textures, all of that. And when it comes to plant-based beverages, you want to deliver the absolute best experience possible so that people don't feel like they have to compromise when they're ordering something other than traditional milk beverages. And that's why I would encourage you to use the Barista series from Pacific. It's the line of plant-based performance beverages that is created for baristas and tested by some of the world's best baristas before it even reaches your counter. So you know it stands up to the heat from steaming, produces amazing texture for latte art, and also, some would say most importantly, it is a balanced beverage, and so it's focused on the coffee. Check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com for more information and get samples in your store and try it for yourself. As always, I think you're going to be impressed. I've always loved using the Barista series throughout my career as a barista and think they do just a fantastic job. So in my opinion, if you want to serve the best, you need to use the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, today we're going to be talking about a topic that we haven't really covered on the show prior. I'm excited to dive into it. We're talking about insurance and risk mitigation. You know, insurance is one of those things that we all have to have. You can't open a business without it. The question is, do you have the right kind of insurance? Are you getting the best deal on that insurance for your business? And beyond what's required, are there other areas where you need to be thinking about getting it? But also think about this. You know, your whole point of getting insurance is the idea that something could happen in the business. We don't really want to use our insurance. That's not the point of it. It's good for protecting us against things that can happen, but we don't want to encourage things to happen. So we're going to talk a little bit about risk mitigation as well, because obviously that is the reason why you would be getting insurance in the first place. So to help us talk about all of these things, about understanding insurance for small businesses and finessing the kinds of insurance you get as a small business and coffee shop, and then risk mitigation that really makes a difference in your business, we're going to be talking with Brennan Pothetes, who is the co-founder and CEO of Butter Insurance. Now, the whole point of Butter Insurance is to offer a more accessible and efficient insurance experience for coffee shops that is coupled with a safety program that makes them more sustainable, makes your business more sustainable. Brennan is a veteran entrepreneur with a background in insurance, banking, and software development for companies like Bloom Credit, Rhino and Simple. And at Rhino, he helped build a product that saved renters $500 million since the onset of the pandemic by replacing cash security deposits with affordable insurance. This is the kind of stuff that Brennan, through his career, has lived and breathed. And through my conversations with him around this episode and even during this episode, it's clear to see his heart is for small businesses and helping us succeed as businesses, deeply rooted in his own family experience as well. And this conversation with him is very informative. So we start talking about insurance and kind of understanding the lay of the land when it comes to small businesses and coffee shops, and the state of our insurance right now, and some of the things that we can do to improve what we currently have. And then we talk and round out our conversation talking about risk mitigation, areas where you can improve your business to make it safer and as a result, more sustainable. So let's get right to it. I hope that you really enjoy this conversation on insurance and risk mitigation with Brennan Pothetes. All right, Brennan, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Welcome. I am really excited to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am really surprised, honestly, after 6 years of Keys to the Shop. It's going to be 6 years, actually.
Wow.
I don't think we've ever talked about insurance necessarily.
Oh my God. This is like the best thing.
Yeah, it's the best thing. Exactly. The kind of thing that you really need, but unfortunately, a lot of folks don't really think of. I do think that the pandemic really kindled people's interest in what kind of insurance they do put in place when they're starting their shops or what they need going forward. I know I talked to several clients about this, especially in recent years, but it's a long time coming is what I'm saying. So I'm glad to have you on the show. And I want to just start by talking a little bit about where you're coming from professionally. I know you founded Butter, which offers small business insurance for people that run coffee shops and other small businesses, I imagine. But the whole point of Butter and how you got there, I'm really interested in. So tell us a little bit about that.
I've been working in financial technology for almost 15 years. So I come out of a deep background in insurance and banking, and Butter is the fourth company that I've helped build. And really my passion has been around trying to help people, help them get financial confidence, help them save money. So early in my career, I helped build one of the first digital banks. And then most recently, I helped build a platform that basically made it so that renters don't have to pay a security deposit. And so both me and my founder, Jen, we come out of small business as our family. So I grew up, being around some of my uncle's businesses. Jen grew up in her family business, and we started looking a lot at, their insurance, right? Like now that I've been doing this for so long, and we found that like the average business basically doesn't have enough insurance. So about 40% of the time, a business doesn't have enough insurance to actually sustain a loss. And then the statistics around it are pretty crazy. So about 81% of businesses fail because of something the owner could have done to prevent it. Which when you put those two together and you start thinking like, what are your most beloved businesses, right? Like my favorite coffee is Kova Coffee. It's not Starbucks coffee. Like my favorite coffee shop is First Village here in Austining, New York, where I live. And it's definitely not like a Starbucks or a Dunkin'. Great businesses, but you have to start thinking like, okay, why does a Starbucks or why does a Chase branch or a Chili's lasts so much longer than like an independent business that the community loves, that offers a great product, and what it really comes down to, in my opinion, is it comes down to these small things in the business where what do you do to reduce your risk? What do you do to like up level your operations, up level your efficiencies? And when you start putting all this stuff together, you realize that like, okay, if most of our small businesses and most of our independently owned businesses don't have enough insurance, they're overpaying for the insurance that they do have. And then to top it off, there's no one there to help basically say, hey, Chris, there's you should really look out for that floor, or you should check your wiring, or there's a bunch of stuff we can cover in a bit, but there's a bunch of compounding things that happen that a business owner should completely care about. That when you're just trying to run your business and serve your customers day to day, it doesn't come top of mind. Whereas like when you're a large corporation like a Starbucks, like you have a whole team that is just going out trying to like reduce the risk. So really like the whole essence of what Butter is about is trying to basically increase the livelihood and increase the longevity of our independent businesses in the US. So that's Jen and I's dream. And we most of our customers typically actually buy more insurance. They save money on the coverage that they buy. But more importantly, every one of our customers gets a dedicated insurance expert. So these are people that have done risk management for like large retail chains or bigger Fortune 500 companies. And instead, we're bringing that to like the local community so that we can help your shop get through the next storm or get through the next, God forbid, lawsuit or fire or anything that will inevitably happen. So it's, insurance for me, it sounds, a lot of people are like, oh my God, why would you ever think about insurance? But it's actually super numbers driven and really, really interesting. And it honestly is like the backbone of, sustainability for your business. So that's what gets me up in the morning.
That's well put. Yeah, I was thinking about the fact that you mentioned your favorite coffee and coffee shop,
Yeah.
and how I love coffee shops. This is why I've been doing what I've done for the last 22 years now, and if so many people listening, this is their story as well. But we go from passion to passion oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
but the infrastructure and the foundations are often left unattended to, and then we're blindsided by different. It may not be a pandemic of the size of what we've experienced recently, but it might be just regular business stuff that's always been part of the deal of running a small business, the risk. And the big businesses you mentioned, they have teams because they know that's part of why they can continue to do what they do. And you'd think that as a small business, you would feel that urgency a lot more to get yourself insured and to focus on those things because you don't have that team. So you really need to, zero in on this stuff because you have way more to lose. Like you could
Absolutely.
lose a store, a Starbucks could lose 10, 15, 100 stores and they'd be fine. You lose your store, you lose everything. And so what is it that keeps us from being insured the way we should, or even just beginning that journey of discovering the kind of things that we actually need versus just kind of doing what's always been done that's not effective?
Yeah, I think really most people's journey with insurance starts when you're looking for your location to open your coffee shop, and your landlord or whoever you're getting a commercial lease from, or if you're buying the property, your bank, they're basically like, hey, Chris, you need 1 or 2 million or 5 million in liability coverage to get this bank loan right from the SBA, or you need X amount of coverage to sign this lease, and you're like, oh God, I need to go get insurance. And then you're usually in like a scramble mode. So like most of the time when I've interviewed different shop owners, they're sort of like, okay, I'm going to go talk to someone I know, or I'm going to ask my CPA, or I'm going to ask my lawyer, and then typically you get referred to a retail broker. And you place that insurance, and you're all about like, how do I open my shop quickly? You're thinking about your experience, you're thinking about all these other dimensions, and instead you're like, okay, this is just a checkbox, this is a compliance checkbox that I have to legally have. And that mindset, right, and that also crosses over when you need your first employee too. That's when you need workers comp. But that mindset of compliance check, move on so you can open your shop and have your business, right? Like we all fall into that. It's like I think it's really easy just to say, this is a thing that's in my way, I want to knock it out and get it done. I'm opening a business that costs a lot of money for me personally, so I don't want to outlay a ton of cash on things that I don't know. And you're worried more about the present than the future, right? So then fast forward, a lot of our customers, most of our customers are actually established businesses. We typically work with really seasoned operators. So our businesses tend to be like over 5 years old, multiple locations, and they haven't looked at their insurance since they opened. And what that
Wow.
means is like that's pretty wild. So like how much has your business changed in 5 years, right? Like think about outdoor dining, right? like I know a lot of we have some businesses that cross over into sort of cafe spaces. So like they had no outdoor dining spaces, uh, you know, 4 years ago, but now they do, right? And that increases their business, but it also increases a lot of liability on the premises. Um, a lot of shops, like we have a customer that they're now getting into roasting and they've never done roasting before. And so there's a whole end of product liability you need to think about, right? Like, is my packaging safe? Is my product consistent? Right? Like there's a whole wholesale side to the business that changed. And then, we have another business probably last week. They decided to start offering cocktails later at night, right? Um, didn't have the liability coverage, didn't have the proper things in place for it. And so what that means is like not only is there some state stuff that you can run afoul of, but what that means for you and your business is like, okay, let's say someone's drinking, they're taking a selfie, they slip and fall, they break their arm or they hurt themselves, right? Or a fight breaks out. That liability comes directly to your business, right? And so the average claim, depending on like the place that you're at, right? But like just to get into a lawsuit with someone is $75,000. And that's
Mm-hmm.
like probably on the low end. So like you're talking a lot of money really quickly that can happen when you're just trying to be like opportunistic.
It's really interesting to think about this case per case ish. There's all sorts of things that could happen and may happen, and maybe this is why people don't do anything about it. I'm going to take my chances because there's no ROI for my insurance. I'm going to get this, and then I'm just going to it's going to sit there. This costs me some money. And what are the chances that I'm really going to be involved in a lawsuit with somebody slipping in my cafe? And I really just need to save money. And so to save money, I'm just not going to get these things. Just like when I buy an airplane, a ticket on a Delta or something, it says, do you want to insure this flight? I'm like, probably not,
Yeah.
And so maybe people are aware, but they're opting out because they don't want to spend the money on something that they don't think they're going to need in the future. So address that for us and help us get over that mindset barrier. Maybe there's some things that are legit, like you shouldn't do unless it's really relevant to your current situation. But how do we embrace something that we don't see the benefit of right away, like these various forms of insurance?
Yeah. So I think, that's the existential question of insurance in general, right? Like, I don't personally buy, travel insurance when I buy a ticket. But I definitely make sure when I buy my house that I have the appropriate coverages around different big things that can happen, right? And I think that's like the distinction where, if you have a trip cancel, and this is how I think about risk in general, right? It's not only like likelihood, but it's also magnitude, right? And what that means is like how frequently can something happen, but then if it does happen, what does that do to you, right? And that's like really how you need to think about it. And this is actually how, I used to work for really large financial institutions. It's literally how they think about their business, right? Like if something could end the business and there's like a relatively like moderate chance it could happen over the course of 5 to 7 years, like you have to absolutely, as a good business owner, like try to mitigate that and address it. And the really interesting thing about insurance is that it's super mathematical, and the math isn't crazy complex. Like it's statistics from like the 1950s, but you can go to any carrier, and they actually have a team of people doing stats, and you can get down and say, okay, over let's say 10,000 businesses in the New York area, we know that X% are going to have this much damage in fire, this much damage in lawsuits, and this much damage in water water related damages. And what's crazy about it is on the whole of like 10,000 businesses or 100,000 businesses, that's 99% accurate. So what gets really hard is when you get down to like your business, right? Like it feels more obscure. You're like, okay, is someone really going to slip and fall in this thing? Is there going to be a bad winter storm that hits me? I don't know. It's not top of mind. Okay, I'm going to like move on. But what I always say to our customers is you're paying for this stuff already. Like it's most states have a law that you have to have workers' comp. Most like all landlords require liability and property. And so if you're already paying for it, right? And a typical shop, by the way, it's about 3% of revenue is their insurance cost, 3 to 5%. So it's not like and there's other industries like construction where your insurance cost is like 50% of your revenue. So it's a big deal. You're already paying for it, and it's not, the cost itself isn't gonna, put you in the poorhouse. But the actual incremental things you can do to optimize it is really important. So one of our first customers, Goose Cup, actually down in the Virginia area, great coffee shop. We actually helped them increase their business personal property coverage and increase their overall coverage and actually save them some money. So it's really about like optimizing and trading off on like what coverages you want to have, what your business has done. And so there's something like, for me, it's like, it's not like, hey, I'm selling you some insurance that you don't have to have. Because like that travel insurance, Chris, like your example is like, hey, you should buy this for your flight to Bermuda, right? Like it could happen. You don't have to buy it. If the flight gets canceled, like you might lose some money, but it's not going to like, upend your livelihood. For your business, you're already paying for this stuff, and you're probably overpaying, and you're probably buying the wrong stuff. And that's just like straight math. And so for me, I'm like, why not take, 5, 10, 20 minutes and get with someone who can help optimize that for you? And that's like really, that's the case that resonates well.
With coffee shops, what are the most common configurations of ideal insurance that you see where you've helped people optimize, and this really looks like a healthy profile for somebody running a business that has a couple of locations, maybe a roastery, and a staff of say 10 to 20 people?
Like generally your policy at that level it's called a business owner's policy, and that covers all your like liability, and it's a bundled policy that was actually created in like the 1970s. But that's where your property insurance, your general liability, that's where all of that is. And really carrier by carrier it's different. So there's some carriers, right? And our carrier partner, by the way, is the Hartford. They're really great. They're super high quality. They have a really good package within their BOP, right? And so what we typically actually do is we look at a coffee shop's BOP, and we look at what's included, right? And we not only look at the coverage amounts, so like, okay, how much coverage do you actually have relative to what's required? That's step one, which, like, believe it or not, actually, like sometimes that actually gets out of whack, but that's the easiest to fix. And that's just like, do you have enough coverage to like satisfy your SBA requirement or satisfy your landlord requirement? That's like table stakes. Then you have to go and we look at like your exclusions. So the exclusions part of your policies are things where people got really, that's where people got really upset, right? And like when you talk to a lot of owners, they're like, I've had claims, I've never had a claim paid. And that's a really common thing that comes up. And you're like, well, why haven't you had a claim paid? And you actually go into the exclusions. And so you look at like business interruption. Okay, great. I have business interruption insurance. Well, there's an exclusion for business interruption insurance for a pandemic. And so like you actually don't really have business interruption insurance in the event of a pandemic shutting down your business.
Right.
Right. And a lot of carriers put that in place way back in the day from like when SARS and MERS, it kind of happened, right? And now some states are banning that in new filings, but a lot of filings have pandemic exclusions. There's also, I was talking to a customer down in Georgia, and it was really interesting. She had theft and burglary coverage, but what was excluded was if there's a riot or a protest, right? And so there was a riot, civil disobedience type situation. Her glass got broken, a bunch of her stuff got stolen. She was like, "Great, I've got, you know, X amount of coverage to cover that." Submits a claim, denied. Why? Because, hey, we have an exclusion for riots, right? And so there's all these like nuanced things in your actual policy under exclusions that you can, it's actually the easiest thing to go read. You can go right down and just see what's excluded. And then we go and we work with our clients and we say, okay, what are you concerned about any of these risks? Are these things that you care about? And a lot of people are like, I want business interruption up to this amount. Or like a great example, you bought your policy, 5 years ago, you're making like 250K a year in revenue. You have business interruption insurance. Something happens that shuts your business down. Like let's say in the winter, your heat goes out, or let's say, something bigger happens, that makes it so people can't go into your shop. So you file a business interruption claim. They're like, great, Chris, you've been approved. We see your revenue is 250K a year. Here's the difference in that revenue for like these days. But then what actual happens is that your revenue is now 1.5 million, right? And so like you haven't updated that with your carrier to update the pricing. So they're only going to give you what you've told them. That's another one where you kind of like get into a bit of trouble. And then the final thing that we do that usually when you're buying that policy at that first time, you're trying to get the cheapest cost as quickly as possible, right? Because like we're all frugal business owners, and like I think that's how you have to be good custodians of your business, and that's how you're successful. But that sometimes cuts both ways, right? And so you're like, okay, I want the smallest amount of business personal property coverage as possible. I want $25,000. Now, there's very few shops I talk to when you like think about their espresso machines, especially the ones that are doing roasting, all their build outs, right? Like their tenant improvements is only $25,000. Like most people need like 100, 150, 200K of business personal property coverage. And that's incrementally not much more expensive. And so that I think is really an area that we like to focus on. And then so one, do you have one, are there exclusions that don't match your business goals? Two, do you have enough business personal property to cover what you've done? So like if a fire happens, great, your building's covered, but none of the stuff you've done with your shop is. Like that's a rough spot. And then the final thing that's a newer one, especially in places like California and New York, is employer liability. And so this is an area that a lot of carriers will give coverage to within your BOP. You can either get an endorsement or you can ask for it. But what happens is like if you don't have good training policies in place, right, or you don't have like good training in for your managers, there are a lot of employee lawsuits that are happening, right? Like, and that's an area where we try to get coverage for our businesses where it makes sense. Because that's sort of another area as well that we like to think about.
All of this that you're talking about is so new. Like you used the word nuanced. It's nuanced. It's something you would probably want to always have. You'd be checking in with all the details and the fine print, but it seems like the set it and forget it mentality is just common. So that these exclusions or the things that were relevant become irrelevant. We do this in small business in the coffee shop. We do this with other things like our checklists. We had an opening checklist, and then 5 years later it's the same thing. But even though everything's crossed out and written over, it seems pretty consistent. And a lot of it is to do with how we approach the business in general, not just the insurance. So we're putting out fires all the time, and we're not building structures to be able to at least touch base with all of the foundational elements of our business, especially the people. You just mentioned management and people training and policies, et cetera. Yep. So the idea that we might have the ideal package, like you could work with somebody to get the perfect amount of insurance and it's nuanced and it's beautiful, frame it, put it on the wall. But it's not there to protect. It's there in case something happens, but you don't want a court disaster. And so I guess the idea is with risk mitigation, what kind of things do you suggest people engage in to be able to avoid, like first invest in the insurance, but you don't want to have to use it necessarily.
Yep.
It's nice that it's there, especially if it's circumstances that you can't control. But there's also circumstances that you can control. So, talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I think that's sort of the 1-2 punch of what butter is all about, right? Like, it's not only making sure that you're getting the right coverage at a fair price, which, just to add a comment before I get into your question, I think most of financial services is needlessly complicated, because a lot of institutions like to profit from that complication, right? So small business and small dollar commercial, they make up a huge portion of the insurance industry, but to get the least amount of customer service, the least amount of focus, because a lot of carriers would rather go write, $500,000 worth of business for, a big stadium or a warehouse or something crazy, rather than go down and help a business, right? And so I think how insurance used to be, my mom actually used to be an underwriter in the 70s. They would go to the business and they would it wasn't just, hey, I'm going to sell you insurance really cheap. They'd be like, hey, Chris, like, I see your refrigeration's kind of on the fritz. Like, you really need to get that checked out, right? And that would help prevent a claim. They would go in and they'd be a partner to the business. And that's the crux. And that's like when my founder, Jen, and I had sort of an aha where we're like, oh my gosh, there's so much value we can add by not only simplifying the insurance process for people, but we can actually add a level of service around the business as well that, like, I think the industry is largely optimized away from. And so that's something that's gotten our carrier partners like really excited. And that's also why we like to target business operators that are like really savvy and actually quite experienced, because we know they care about safety. Like, you have to, for better or worse, like, you have to make a couple mistakes and realize, like, okay, if I don't pay attention to small details, small things turn into big things, and then big things can take me out, right? And you have to have that built into your DNA, and then that'll help you really be proactive about safety. So to get into your safety question, it's always basically fire or water are like either the two top claim amounts, depending on like where you're at. And so I'll go into fire first. And fire is really mainly electrical. And then for those of you with like cooking implements, right? Like, so some folks serve food in their coffee shop. It's keeping the grease traps clean. It's keeping the vents clean. It's Chris, you talked about the checklist. It's honestly having that up to date and running a really tight process around keeping your stuff clean. It's also, some of my favorite coffee shops, like one of my favorite coffee shops is Peacekill Coffee down here in the Hudson Valley. And they are in an older building, right? And there's a lot of coffee shops, especially out here in the Northeast, that are in, buildings that were in 1910, 1920. The electrical in those buildings is pretty rough, right? And so I like to have our customers go through and, something you can always do is like have people check on electrical. Like, you can have an electrician out, come in and check on things pretty cheaply and pretty easily. If you see something sketchy, if you're, daisy chaining a bunch of things, like spend the money, put in an extra outlet, like make sure your circuit breakers are right. And then on the front end, like the standard thing, like if you just Google it, is like have, appropriate fire extinguishers, stuff like that. But the thing on the fire that I like to call out is really like the electrical stuff, because that's where you can get like an arc that starts a fire. And, fire tends to be like probably one of the most common. And that's usually where, you'll see a claim amount of, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Right. And that's where, if you don't have that appropriate business property coverage on your own property and your tenant improvements, that's where you're going to be like, okay, great, my coverage paid for the building, or my coverage paid for fixing some of the stuff, but like I'm going to be out of pocket $100,000 and I don't have business interruption. So now I'm going to wait, 2 months before I can reopen. And unfortunately that puts a lot of people out of business.
So with what you're talking about here, mentioning Peekskill Coffee in an old building, a lot of people take over old buildings, old gas stations, garages, in places like that, and there's a charm to it. Not, or if you're just in an old strip mall or something similar,
yeah.
you're going to make do with what you have, and you're relying on the previous tenants to have at least done good electrical work, although you can't always be guaranteed of that. And so I guess you would have to rely on your contractor or somebody to inspect what's going on there to say, are you even grounded? Are these things even
Yes.
Installed the right way? Because you could have already signed a lease and it's too late at that point. Now you've inherited a huge mess where you have to redo all the electric. All this really just sounds like you can't take these things for granted. You have to do your due diligence and check these things out before you start assuming that, anyone has done a good job.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the same. I'm obviously a coffee nut because I made an insurance company that helps coffee shops. So it's the same way of like making a really good pour over or making a really good espresso, right? Like you put so much meticulousness into like tamping the coffee down. Like, do you have the right water? Like, did you grind the beans in the right way? Like, where did the beans come from? How are they roasted, right? Like that level of detail makes a really great cup of coffee, right? And I think that level of detail and meticulousness needs to be brought over into other aspects of your business. And like, do you need to be caring about the electrical in your shop every day? Like, no. Like if the power's on and working, great, you can sell coffees. That's awesome. But like when we went back to the kind of the risk management thinking, right? Like, what is the magnitude? The magnitude is you could lose your whole shop. And then what's the likelihood? Well, this is the most likely claim. It's probably not going to happen year one, but definitely within 10 years, definitely within 7 years, probably within 5 years, right? And so I think what what you can do is always just, if there's things that look funky, have an electrician check it out. Don't sleep on it. And it goes back to like little things become big things quickly, especially with like electrical, especially with fire. And if you're in old buildings, like I actually live in a house from 1919, I love it. But because of all this stuff, I've had so many electricians check out different things and I keep finding things, but I sort of think about it like, okay, I'm going to spend $100 or spend $200 and I'm going to have someone come out and fix this socket, or I'm going to make sure that, my circuit breaker is working correctly, or I'm going to make sure this doesn't arc, or I'm not going to, daisy chain, 3 or 4 different things together where it can get hot. And that's, I think it's just about having that attention to detail and just sort of doing like annually thinking about it, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think the same time that we think about taxes, the same time that we do next year planning, that's the time to think like, okay, is all my electrical good? Do I have the right fire stuff in place? Like, and it kind of that's going to be a theme in like many of these claims, because a lot of what goes wrong in a business, the owner can prevent, right? And that goes back to that study. I think it was actually, I think it was Ohio State that did this study, but it's like 81% of businesses fail because of something the owner could have done to prevent it, right? And so like it's the same thing in the fire space.
So the system has to be in place in order to account for the fact that you can't account for everything yourself, right? So talk a little bit about that when it comes to fire, and then, water. Of course, we use water in coffee. You can't have it without water. There's systems that we need to have to help us, be the owner that doesn't fall into that 81%, right?
Yeah. And I think, one that's very timely now with most of the country and freezing temperatures, especially those places that don't normally experience it. A winter checklist that looks right at electrical and looks right at water. And when I say water damage, right, like there could be water damage from flooding or a storm. I'm talking more like a pipe freezes and breaks and then floods a place and causes a ton of damage. That's something that's completely preventable. Like I was actually in a restaurant the other day and their bathroom sink had frozen, right? It was like 4 degrees out. And there's a ton that you could do to pre-insulate it to make that not happen. And I'm betting if that froze, there's some other stuff that froze, and then that's going to ruin your tenant improvements, or that's going to create a slippery floor. Or in that case, like if the sinks are freezing, you need to have your employees be able to wash their hands. So you have like a food sanitation issue. It's just like all these little things that seem ticky-tacky end up building and building and building, and then creating a big issue. And that's why when you look at someone like a Starbucks or, a Blue Bottle or a really large coffee chain, they care about all these things, and they care about the layout of the building. They care about inspections. They care about walkthroughs. And I think for like the winter, creating a good winter checklist that you first start with, like, okay, are all my pipes insulated? Then you're like, okay, if I'm in a drafty building, is my heat working? Is my boiler tuned up? And a lot of this stuff you can work with your landlord on. And depending on your lease, you can actually, like, if there's bad if there's bad electrical, or there's something that needs to be improved, I would encourage like a pretty active conversation with your landlord, or if you don't own the building, because in a lot of cases you can go and they're trying to maintain the property. They want you to be successful, and you can say, "Hey, this wiring's messed up. I'm like, fix it," or "I'm happy to fix it. Can you give me a rent credit?" Like, there's a bunch of stuff, and this is from a past life when I did more commercial stuff, but there think of that as an active conversation, and think of that as a partnership. But back to the winter checklist, I think the next thing is like your floors get really slick, right? Because people are walking in with snow. How are you keeping the floors dry? Like, how are you keeping your actual shop warm? And that's a big one. Do you need to bring in extra heaters? Do you need to bring in that type of stuff? Because most of the time you bring in an electric heater, that's again an electrical arc, or it's going to be in a place that gets too hot and could start a fire. And I think right now this is like really, really timely, is like, what are you doing for your winter checklist? For those of us not in like Los Angeles or Florida, but you know, in the colder places, I think it's really, really important. And this is typically where a lot of insurance carriers see a lot of claims, both in fire and water.
Right, right. What's your alligator insurance in Florida?
I mean, Florida got down to like they got some freezing in those places that normally don't get freezing, and then surprise get freezing. That actually causes a lot more damage than like Syracuse having -5 temperatures, because usually the shops in Syracuse are used to it being cold. A lot of the shops like in Miami Beach don't think about it. So like that's actually another great thing on your list. Like, it sounds dumb, but like, look at the weather and look at the weather forecast. And I actually track, there's some really great folks on Twitter that are really good meteorologists. I actually track several different meteorologists for a lot of the regions that we're active in, because I want to be able to think about like what could happen.
It's not just the weather though, too, right? It's things like,
Yeah.
when you're talking about business interruption, a lot of people suffer from scheduled city plans that shut down
Yeah.
streets and things like that. And I guess you could keep going in this what if world, and it requires you to be outside of this identity as the scrappy underdog independent coffee shop, and be a bit more like, view yourself a little bit more professionally, in the sense that you can still
Definitely.
be a small business owner and have that independent entrepreneurial spirit. That's, we create this enmity between corporate and independent, but the thing that corporate gets right is this risk stuff for more than independents do, because there's tons of experiences that I've had in coffee shops. I'm like, this is definitely an OSHA violation. This is definitely risking my life, and they let me do it. I did it. I know I did it. I got under that espresso machine while it was balancing on 2x4s. There was one place where the espresso machine was plugged in, and I felt electrical charge through the drip tray. Turns out the 220 wasn't installed properly, so it had to get fixed. So there's a lot of this that seems to be wrapped up in how we spend our time as operators. Weekly we need to be checking in and keeping a rhythm. So these checklists that you're talking about for cold weather or what's coming up, how much of our week and our time does it take to create a pattern and a rhythm of maintenance that will really mitigate risk?
I mean, if you try to just focus on risk prevention instead of making a really good cup of coffee and keeping your customers happy and your employees happy, you're not going to have a business, I think. And that was kind of like always the funny comment I would say when I was doing a lot of risk management for like a large bank back in the day. Is like, we can't risk manage this thing down to zero. because you can never take risk away. But you can invest the right amount of time to like reduce the likelihood that that bad thing could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I typically recommend for like a normal shop owner is like, hey, this is in the slow time of the year, right? Like actually it's usually Q4, but I feel like everybody I've talked to, it's been really busy this year. But like in your slow time of the year, take a couple hours and just start thinking about what do you need to think about as an owner and what do you want to focus and prioritize on. And for me personally, like even with butter as my business, like I quarterly or every 6 months, I think I have like a couple of things that I'm like, okay, I want to poke on, or I want to check on, or I want to have a good partner there. And there's a lot of what I would say to everybody here is there are really great insurance and risk professionals out there, that you can go and partner with. And like, if you haven't talked to your insurance person, you should definitely find a new one, or you should engage with them because like they could be great. And that they're there and you're paying them and they make a good amount of money on your policy. Like that's their job to support you. And that's their job to help you think through these things. So like, Chris, to your point, like you could go and DIY a bunch of this stuff. But I almost guarantee for everybody in the audience, if you emailed your insurance broker tomorrow and said, hey, I would love a winter checklist, or what do you think are my top two biggest claims? They'll email you right back and they'll help you out. So I believe in having good people around you that support you. And that's sort of this mentality, the set it and forget it, or the be the scrappy business owner. That's how you really be a scrappy business owner. You have to know when you're doing the stuff, but you also have to have a good network of people around you that are supporting you. And if you're already paying them to do it, which in my opinion, if you're paying a broker to get you insurance, like they have to be doing some of this risk support stuff for you as well. And that's where I think a lot of your audience can probably get the most value, is just having that relationship.
Yeah. That was going to be something I wanted to talk about was, where people are right now. Like we coming into January and February tend to be like the really slow times for coffee shops. And we just got to this crescendo of holiday, buying frenzy, hopefully for all of you that happened and that you had some record days. So congrats on that. But now coming into the new year, and this is why we're having this conversation now, you do have the opportunity to sort of say, okay, for 2023 and the foreseeable future, here are some things that we need to put in place. And how you just described it is, creating a bit more of this conversational reality of embracing risk mitigation as a normal conversation to have with your insurance provider and with your management team, because you're not going to be the one to do everything. So if your average customer there at Butter is this, as you described, the size of their business, they have managers, they have lead baristas.
Yep.
That also is something that needs to be paid attention to, because they're the ones that can alert you to issues. But oftentimes we just kind of say, well, no news is good news. So what how do we approach that when it comes to delegation?
Yeah, I think as you're kind of talking about the question, I think a lot of business is about building a good network, right? And that's like building a good network of managers, building a good network of like fellow business owners that you can get advice from, consultants that can come in and help you, customers, like key customers that'll buy your Christmas cookies that you're putting out. But this is the same on the financial side, right? Like you have to build your financial network for your shop. And I think, having a good CPA or good accountant is important. Having a good insurance provider and insurance partner is really, really important. And that's how you create time for yourself as a business owner, is going out and training your folks appropriately and having the right people in. And like, if you're running a solid operation and people are really focused on the quality of the coffee and the customer experience, a lot of the stuff that's customer experience centered is also going to make you a safer operator and make your shop safer, and should make your insurance reduce your insurance risk as well. And that's like why we like really working with people who are some of like the best operators, because they get this, that it's all a bit of a flywheel that you put together. So like, I think for like your management team or your baristas, it's like, there's little things like, just properly maintaining your machine. And it's funny, if you actually live in an area, or not live, if your shop's in an area with like harder water, like I live in an area with harder water, you'll want more maintenance on that machine, because fewer maintenance on a machine with lower water, like that machine's going to break, and then you're going to have some downtime, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's really about just creating this dynamic, not only with like your internal team um, around like what your expectations are, and setting those expectations in a really clear way, because then you have to, communication is super key. But on the flip side, like I think anyone that is like a service provider to me, I think of them as part of my team, and like you should be thinking of like your insurance person as part of your shop team. Like, what are they doing? How are they adding value to you? How are they, I'm sure a lot of people would come in and spend time with you and your managers. If you're concerned about, you mentioned OSHA, and when you're fixing an espresso machine, right? Like if you're worried about like employee safety, which in this everybody should be, right? Or you're worried about like, hey, California just passed, a new employment law. What policy should we have, or how should we think about it? Most good insurance people should come in there and talk to you and your team about it, or give you resources on it at the minimum. And that was an unlock for me in building a lot of the software businesses that I've built, is that I think of so many people around me as like part of my team, and I try to like knit those resources together in a way that really helps everybody be able to access those resources.
That's great. And the idea that they're a part of your team also means that you feel a little bit more confidence and freedom asking for things and clarifications, rather than playing a little bit like, oh, I don't want to bother them too much, or I'm worried that they're going to be, a little annoyed or whatever. Yeah, I guess you would have to find a new provider if that was the case, if you could, if you've got somebody like that. But we have people come in to talk about tasting coffees. The roaster will come into a wholesale account and do a tasting with the employees. And it is also something that I've seen in the industry, thankfully, is there's a lot more HR consultants, for example, that come into organizations that do similar types of things when it comes to employee culture and the legalities of employment. And they'll train managers, and they'll do that kind of stuff. A lot of it, a lot of it around like sexual harassment and things like that. So insurance shouldn't be really any different. And it sounds like a really valuable part of a portfolio of practices for your business.
I completely agree. And by the way, like that's why I love coming on your podcast and listening to your podcast, Chris, because a lot of what you talk about running a good shop also makes you a great insurance customer, right? And so I think like that's where you talk about someone coming in to do like HR consulting and training your team. You should be getting credit for that. And like, guess what? Like Starbucks doesn't do an HR training for all their managers because the goodness of their heart. They do it because two reasons. One, their insurance companies, I think at that scale, make them. I don't know. I don't know if that's right or not. But the second is like, it's really, they know that reduces their risk, and that reduces the risk of the event. And I'm sure they also want like a great culture and that sort of stuff. I don't want to be too harsh on our friends over in Seattle, but I think that same mentality is really, really important. And that's actually what like I really created, Butter for, is because I see these really great operators. I see people that like want to, there's someone the other day that I was talking to in LA, and she literally was like, I have OSHA guides, like I have stacks of paper and policies. And I'm like, this person, I guarantee you, is safer than like any Dunkin' Donuts or like any McDonald's, because they care so much and they had so much attention to detail to like their manager training and everything. And I just like instantly was like, wow. But like the sad thing is that a lot of cases, because you're like a single shop or a couple of shops, you're not going to get not get as good of an insurance deal. You're not going to be in that high quality of insurance. And so like, that's the stuff that I think, you're focusing on all the good things that make and reduce your risk. I guess my shameless plug would be, make sure that your insurance carrier is one that sees that and know that you are a great customer and know that you're a high value to that insurance company and that they should be treating you in the same way back, right? So they should be giving you resources. They should be talking about things you can do to reduce risks. And you are an outlier, right? Like as a business operator to us in insurance, like if you want to talk about safety and you're doing all this stuff, oh my God, you're like a tier 1A customer. We'd all love to have you. So that I guess is just like my plug and some context from the insurance side.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that, you should be rewarded for that. And in the reward, obviously, is the idea that you are truly creating safety in your coffee, because we've talked about this a lot. We want to create a space where people, a good culture and a safe place, but we do that. We try to emote that. We try to create just this Care Bear stare version of safety for all of you 80s kids out there. Just from our hearts comes the safety. Now, it's actually just more practical than that. And that's why I love this conversation. It's like you have to put into action the things that your intentions tell you. Your heart tells you these intentions are good, but now let's put it into practice. And so I guess that leads me to the last question, which is, somewhat answered in a lot of what we're talking about. But after people stop this interview and walk back out into their coffee bar, what are the first couple of steps that you think are the most practical and highest leverage points for most coffee shops to get on a better path with insurance and lowering risk?
Yeah, absolutely. So your top 3 risks are fire, water, or lawsuit, God forbid, like slip and fall, a customer slips or an employee slips. And so the best things that you can do is one, create a good checklist and make sure that your electrical is solid. And especially if you're in like a pre-aware building, really make sure that that's good. On the water, make sure that you're insulating it. Make sure that you're shutting off water before a big storm, right? Or doing different things to just make sure that you're not creating a lot of water damage, or that you have, a lot of folks actually are starting to get like sensors in place into the shop, right? Like rings or cameras, like things like that will help you when you're not there to see like, oh wow, the water is like flowing everywhere. I need to go over there and shut it off. Because just knowing that. And that sounds just like stupid common sense where you're like, okay, the water's flooding my shop, I'm going to shut it off. Guess what? Like a lot of people don't know that that's happening. Don't realize. And then they come in and the damage is like massive. So you can actually not only like reduce the incidents, but you can actually reduce the damage, which is great. And then the third, right, the lawsuits and the slip and fall, that I think it's really one thing on the floor. It's like looking, and if you go into like, I'm not a huge fan of big chains, but if you go into like a big chain of like McDonald's or Denny's or whatever, and you look at their floor is usually like even, they have things marked, they have steps marked. You're like, why are they doing this? And again, it's not like out of the goodness of their heart. They're going through and they actually have a pretty sophisticated team that's making sure that like, okay, the floor is not slippery. If there's holes or if there's like steps in the floor, they're appropriately labeled. That there's guardrails or railings in different places around stairs. And I know for some of us, like in the older buildings, there's cute ways to do this. And I think really, really nice ways to do it to keep it aesthetically pleasing for your shop. So I'm not saying go make your shop look like Denny's. Please don't actually, because I would hate that. But it's these small things that people trip on. And then also make sure that like, if you're in a place that does salting, right? Like salt, make sure there's not ice in front of your place, or make sure that stuff's not slick. Because really it's honestly the slip and fall that usually does folks in. And then I'll give you a bonus fourth, which is just regular maintenance on all your machines, especially in the places if you've got hard water. And what that means is like if you see calcium or you see like white buildup around like your sinks or anything like that, that means you're in a place with harder water. Or you can actually Google, if you're in a hard water place, your servicing should be a lot higher frequency on all your machines if that's the case. So and that'll just help things last longer. It'll help things not break. It'll help you not be down for a couple of days from a business perspective. So those are my my 4 my 3 plus my bonus that you can control that are in your realm that you could literally go and spend like an hour and do, which would massively like that will take you from like the 90th percentile to like the top, like the 99th percentile. Like you'll be in the top 1% if you can mitigate a lot of that stuff. And then on the insurance side, like definitely just have that active conversation with your provider, right? Like, and we're here, which we'd love to talk to anybody. So butterhq.com, but really any insurance provider should be having an active conversation with you. And if you're thinking about this stuff and you care about this stuff, you're a tier 1A customer, and whoever's working with you should think of you like that and treat you that way.
Awesome. Well, I feel like you've treated us this way in this conversation. I'm glad we've talked about this today. And so much of this, again, is on us to sort of walk out. And so you've given us a good roadmap, some good understanding on this, and there's a lot of value in this conversation. So I'm really thankful to have you on the show, Brennan. Where can we go to find more information about what you offer and what you do for the coffee community?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, and I love talking about this stuff. So the easiest place you can go to is our website. It's butterhq.com, and that has info about us. You can reach out to us directly. We can see how much we can save you money on your insurance, but also like if you literally just want to get in touch and talk to me or talk to someone on my team about safety or about what we're doing and how we're thinking about that stuff. I'm also like way open to having those conversations as well.
Awesome. Again, thank you, Brennan. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
All right, everybody. Well, obviously, this was just the beginning. This is the kind of thing that you want to continue to discuss amongst yourselves as an admin team. The two main things are you have to be curious and do your due diligence to make sure that year over year, you are keeping up with the kind of coverage and qualifications, et cetera, that need to be in place for your business so that the insurance that you have is not just a set it and forget it kind of thing, but it's something that's always relevant to where you are in the journey of your business, and that the actual business itself, the physical space and the policies and practices are all things that are made to keep everyone safe and keep your customers and your staff safe. And that creates longevity in the business. So, God forbid you have to use some of this insurance. It's there if you need it, but we're all trying to mitigate these risks. And this really helps you sleep at night. It does. And so I'm grateful for this conversation with Brennan. If you're interested in learning more about Butter Insurance and what they can do to help your business, all you need to do is check them out at butterhq.com. And there'll be some links in the show notes for resources as well. So be sure to check that out. So a big thank you to Brennan for joining us on the show. Again, check them out over at butterhq.com. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me about today's episode, please feel free to reach out. Chris@keystotheshop.com is where you can do so. That's also where you can email me to set up a free discovery call with me to talk about working with Keys to the Shop consulting and coaching, whether you want one-on-one coaching for yourself through a very specific project or cafe assessments to help you level up the way that your coffee shop's operations are running to free you up as an owner to serve the needs of your customers and your staff more. I love finding solutions and creating wins for my clients. So go ahead and reach out if you want to have that conversation, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, if you want to resource yourself well, you want to be equipped for success, one of the places you can go to do that is Coffee Fest. CoffeeFest.com is where you can learn about all of the upcoming shows in 2023, New York, Louisville, Kentucky, Anaheim, California, and then Orlando, Florida. And these are coming up quick. The New York show is in the beginning of March. I'm going to be at all of these shows giving lectures, judging latte art, and I really want to see you there because I know that people who attend Coffee Fest leave excited, energized, equipped through free and accessibly priced lectures, trainings, and workshops, panel discussions on a variety of topics that cover everything from barista culture and training and hiring, finances, mobile coffee. There's so many different things. Go to coffeefest.com to learn more about what's coming up in these shows for the educational content. There's also the latte art competition, cold brew competition. You interact with vendors from the show floor, so you get to talk with these folks, these companies that supply your coffee shop with some of the best products, services out there. And of course, there's the coffee community. Whenever we get together, it is super, like I said, energizing and inspiring. So make your plans to go to one of these shows this year. Use the code KEYS, KEYS, to get 50% off your registration when you go on to coffeefest.com to register yourself and your team for these shows. I hope to see you there. Again, check them out over at coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me and Brennan Pothetes as we talk about insurance and risk mitigation. I hope that it was very useful, and I hope, as always, that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.